Hello, and thanks for joining us from our studios in Israel. Coming up in today's newscast, the U.S. and Israel signed the largest military aid deal in history. Former Israeli President Shimon Peres is improving from his stroke, and the oldest man in the world gets bar-mitzvah 100 years late. I'm Natasha Kirchak here with the latest news in Israel. A deal has finally been inked. American and Israeli officials have just signed the U.S.'s largest ever defense package to Israel and, for that matter, to any country in history. The defense deal is known as a Memorandum of Understanding, or MOU, and it constitutes the single largest pledge of bilateral military assistance ever. According to the deal, Israel will receive $3.8 billion annually, up from the $3 billion pledged each year under the previous MOU. The aid will be granted over the course of 10 years, starting in 2018 and ending in 2028, and it will total a record $38 billion altogether.
This marks a significant increase over our existing funding, and it will ensure that Israel has the support it needs to defend itself by itself and to preserve its qualitative military edge. This is the single largest pledge of military assistance to any country in U.S. history. At a time when we're tightening our belts across the board, with the harmful sequestration spending cuts set to return in just a couple years, this MOU nonetheless greatly increases our military assistance commitment to Israel. And that's not an accident. It's a reminder of the United States' unshakable commitment to Israel's security.
The deal will allow Israel to upgrade most of its fighter aircraft, improve the mobility of the IDF's ground forces, and even strengthen the country's missile defense systems.
This unprecedented assistance will also cover a robust missile defense funding through the next decade for the first time, and will help us effectively plan and develop multi-layer missile defense systems to counter the growing missile threats in our region. A strong Israel is an island of stability in a stormy Middle East, and an important partner in the fight against the forces of terror and extremism in our region and beyond.
Although the package is the largest military aid the U.S. has ever granted to another country, the Israeli Prime Minister has made concessions for the deal. Israel must promise not to seek any additional funds from Congress beyond what is guaranteed in the MOU package. And that's not all. The Jewish state will be forced to phase out a special arrangement that has allowed Israel to spend part of its U.S. aid on its own defense industry instead of on American-made weapons, meaning much of the aid money will need to be spent in the United States. But the Israeli Prime Minister does not seem deterred by these concessions and has issued a big thank you to American President Barack Obama.
אני מבקש להודות לנשיא אובמה ולממשלו על ההסכם ההיסטורי הזה. אני גם מודה לחברינו הרבים בקונגרס האמריקני וגם לעם האמריקני על תמיכתם הגדולה, תמיכה שחוצה מפלגות וחובקת את אורכה ורוחבה של ארצות הברית.
Prime Minister Netanyahu believes the package is proof of the ever-strong relationship between the United States and Israel and is a sign of even more good to come over the next 10 years.
ההסכם הזה ממחיש אמת פשוטה. היחסים בין ישראל לארצות הברית איתנים עוצמתיים. אין זה אומר שאין בינינו מחלוקות מעת לעת, אבל אלו מחלוקות בתוך המשפחה. הן אינן משפיעות כהוא זה על הידידות הגדולה בין ישראל לארצות הברית. ידידות שמתבטאת בהסכם הזה שיסייע רבות להמשך ביצור כוחה של ישראל בעשור הקרוב.
Israelis are rejoicing because former Israeli President Shimon Peres is showing real improvement since his stroke just 2 days ago. The 93-year-old leader does still remain in serious condition, but doctors say he is able to respond to prompts. Peres remains in intensive care and is breathing with the help of a respirator after being rushed to the hospital in Ramat Gan for medical tests on Tuesday. The 93-year-old leader reported that he was feeling unwell during lunch. After being rushed to the hospital, it was later discovered that he had suffered from a stroke that caused internal bleeding in the brain. The news has had all of Israel on edge. Peres is one of Israel's most admirable symbols and the last surviving link to the country's founding fathers.
I love Shimon Peres, and I want to see him. We love Shimon, and we're very missing to him.
Was a little child, and he came to the supermarket to buy milk and bread for his family. I know Peres for many years. I feel very bad. He's a great man for our population and for the country. And what I can say, I hope that he'll be much better, but I don't want him to suffer.
Peres has served in the Israeli government for the past 7 decades in virtually every senior political office, including serving as both prime minister and president. The Israeli statesman won the 1994 Nobel Peace Prize for his work in reaching an interim peace deal between Israel and the Palestinians, and served as president of Israel until 2014. At the time, he was considered the oldest acting statesman in the world. Israel has just green-lighted a project to build a gas pipeline to Gaza in a joint effort with the Palestinian Authority and several donor countries. The initiative is aimed at boosting both energy and water supplies to the Palestinian enclave, where there's a severe shortage of resources. A feasibility study is now being prepared for the Gaza pipeline, dubbed the G4G by the Middle East Quartet, composed of the United States, the United Nations, the European Union, and Russia. The organization has also created a task force to take the project from its conceptual to the implementation stage, while keeping all relevant stakeholders updated as to its progress. Qatar is said to be playing a very constructive role in supporting the project, and so is the Dutch government, which will help Israel to build the line. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced his nation's intention of helping the residents of Gaza during his state visit to the Netherlands earlier this month. The plan comes amid a number of other economic deals signed between Israel and the PA, including the upgrading of postal and cell phone service in the West Bank. They also reportedly reached agreement over the massive $530 million Palestinian debt to Israel's state-owned electric corporation. Right now, the only power plant in the Hamas-controlled territory runs at half capacity, and electricity is only provided on an 8-hour on, 8-hour off basis. Now that the G4G has received the go-ahead, a committee of donor state representatives is set to meet in New York later this month. While most of us seem to be under the impression that Israeli technology has solved the water crisis, experts are warning that isn't true and the situation is almost as dangerous as ever. In fact, the latest report from the Hydrological Service of the Israeli Water Authority shows that the water shortage in northern Israel is the worst it's been in the past 100 years. Public complacency and overpumping of the precious resource are among the biggest culprits, but so is a lack of rain. In Israel, if you live in the south, you've noticed that we've been getting a lot more downpours than our northern neighbors. Water management officials attribute that to global climatic change they say is bound to cause even worse effects throughout the region in the future. Israel is now seeing a far greater than usual drop in the summertime water levels. The Sea of Galilee is 32 centimeters, a little more than a foot below the lower red line. And if the first half of the coming winter is as dry as forecasted, it's expected to hit a near 10-year low. The Dead Sea is down by 22% from just last year. It's no longer being replenished by the Jordan River at all, because that's now being diverted to provide drinking water not only for Israel but also to Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. Another major source, the Western Galilee aquifer, is also below the red line, and there have been significant drops in the country's mountain streams. Desalination plants Israel built to starve off the 2008 water crisis now provide about 40% of the country's country's freshwater needs. But there's no escaping Israel's dependency on natural sources. It also takes 3 years to build the installations and a really long time to build the infrastructure necessary to carry the water. For example, a fifth water line to Jerusalem was started in 2003, but still isn't completed. Scientists are now considering the drilling of deep wells in the Golan for the first time ever to help local farmers. But environmentalists warn that this could cause even greater damage by drying up springs and other tributaries. While the situation seems very dire, some experts say rain levels go through changes every couple of decades, and that the crisis may be resolved by both Israeli man-made technology as well as the opening of the heavens. And now a warm welcome to Rabbi Reuben Spolter, who will guide us through this week's Torah portion. Thanks so much for coming in.
Great to be here. How are you?
Good, good. So tell us about this week's parasha.
This week's parasha is Parashat Ki Tetzeh, which is basically Moshe Rabbeinu is giving a laundry list of over 70 mitzvot. He's giving his great speech. The book of Devarim is this last speech. If you had to say, your last speech, you're a leader, and the last thing you can say to the Jewish people, he's giving it. So he's near the end of the speech, and he's just like throwing in all these mitzvot. A ton of mitzvot. Almost 70 mitzvot in this week's parasha, and it's really like one verse and then another verse, one commandment almost and another, throughout the entire parasha. So there's no narrative in the parasha. There's no story. It's just rule, law, from beginning to end.
So speaking about these rules and laws, 74 of the 613
Oh, you got the number. That's good.
mitzvot, right, are in this week's parasha. I have them written down here.
All 74?
Yeah, 74 of the 613. So that is quite a lot. What are some of the interesting and more relevant mitzvot that are presented there?
Okay, so I thought we would focus on 3 of them that have real strong relevance to our day and age. The first one is called mitzvat ma'akeh. Ma'akeh basically means a fence around a roof. So the Torah says that when you build a new house, whenever you build a house, if you're going to build in your house an aliyat gag that we say in Israel, a balcony on the roof, that says you have to put a ma'akeh ligagecha. You have to put a fence around it. Why?
Interesting.
Why do you think that is?
So that you don't fall?
That's exactly right. It's very interesting. Why wouldn't a person build a fence? The answer is to save money, or he's renting it out and it's not his problem, or people should be careful. Says the Torah, no, you have to be very careful. You have to build a fence so that nobody falls. Ki pol hanofel. That nobody would fall. And people think, mitzvot are like keeping kosher or Shabbat, but they don't often think about mitzvot as being living life in a sensible way. And so this is a fascinating mitzvah because the mitzvah is not just about building a house and putting a fence. For example, there are a lot of areas in life where a person can decide whether to act carefully or carelessly. The one I always like to give, when I was a rabbi in a synagogue in Michigan before I made Aliyah, and I would always talk about this. I talk about the importance of wearing a seatbelt. Because people, for whatever reason, they're careless or they're not careful, and they don't realize that the laws of physics apply to everybody. And when you get into an accident, if you're not wearing a seatbelt, nobody can help you. And so there are these mitzvot. Sometimes when you put it in their religious perspective, someone who's more religious will say, whoa, one second, that's a mitzvah? Maybe I should put on my seatbelt. Maybe I should make my kids wear a helmet when they go out and bike in the street.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that is actually very interesting because it does seem something that would be a basic thing to do, but that is obviously a lesson that is.
Well, we live in Israel. Does everybody wear their seatbelt all the time?
I'm guilty of sometimes not wearing my seatbelt.
Well, now that you know it's a mitzvah, now it's so interesting that the way Israel gets people to wear seatbelts is if there's a huge fine.
Right.
Right. So another way is to say, like very often, it's a mitzvah.
Yeah, absolutely. And the religious community, these are their rules, so this is essential for all of us.
Right.
Okay, so now, what is another example of a mitzvah in this week's parasha that you think is of interest?
So it's interesting. We're in the middle, and we are, thank God. In America, they're in the middle of this heavy election season. And that's all everybody talks about in the United States, and my friends, and we see on Facebook. So the funny thing about elections is everybody knows that elected officials or people trying to get elected make promises. They make commitments. They're going to do this and they're going to do that. The problem is that most of us don't really believe anything they say. And we don't think they're going to do what they say, even though we want them to say what they're going to do, even though we don't believe them. If you think about it, right?
Right.
So there's a mitzvah specifically that relates to this idea about nidarim and nidavot. A nidar is an oath or a promise. So we used to be in olden times that if a person wanted to give something greater to God, he would make an offering. He would say, I want to give an offering in the temple. That was voluntary. It was a voluntary offering, almost like today. Like, I want to give to my synagogue, and I make a pledge on Rosh Hashanah. I'm going to give whatever. Okay, so the Torah says the following. The Torah says, if you make a promise, it says, Lo te'acher l'shalmo. You better fulfill your promise. If you make an oath to give an offering in the temple, that's great. You should keep your word. Why? Because if you don't have to make commitments, you don't have to make promises. But if you make the promise and you don't keep it, that's worse than had you not made the commitment at all, or not made the promise at all. The language in the Torah is very interesting. It says, "Motza sfatecha tishmor ve'asita." That which comes out of your lips, you should guard and you should do. And it's such an important message. Okay, for politicians, if they want my advice, they can call me. But for all of us, the idea of integrity and honesty and doing what you say you're going to do, that's an essential part of being a human being. That it's core to trust. I say I'm going to be here, I come. We make commitments to each other, because without that, there's no understanding, there's no integrity in society. And that's a mitzvah, I think, that speaks to all of us. Don't make commitments you can't keep or you're not going to keep. And when you make commitments, keep to them.
The parasha concludes with the obligation to remember what Amalek did to you. What did he do, and why is that so important to remember?
So Amalek was a person, but really he was the progenitor of a nation. Okay, and the nation of Amalek is a nation that brutally and savagely attacked the Jewish people immediately after Yetziat Mitzrayim, after the Exodus. That when the story is told back in Shemot, in the Sefer, the book of Exodus, that when the Jewish people went out of Egypt and they finally crossed the Red Sea and they're like exhausted and tired and they're just kind of like finding themselves, along comes Amalek and says, you know what, you're tired, you're exhausted, boom, I'll attack. And this has become the nation of Amalek from that point was designated as the arch enemy of the Jewish people, because their goal is to destroy the Jewish people.
Right.
And throughout biblical times, there actually was a nation called Amalek. There was such a thing. As time went along, especially today, there is no nation of Amalek, but Amalek still exists. This idea of there's a groups of people that want to destroy the Jewish people. And so even though we don't know, there's no nationality like Greece or Amalek, they're not the same thing at all. There is no nationality called Amalek. We only have to look back 50 years to know that for reasons that we don't understand, a group of people decided we have to wipe out the Jewish people. So this is extremely relevant today, even as Israel is successful and has grown and has become stronger. So then all of a sudden, out of the woodwork come groups or people that have this virulently anti-Semitic perspective. And that is the Amalek that we talk about. So there's a mitzvah. The mitzvah is Zachor et asher asa lacha Amalek. The mitzvah is to remember this idea of Amalek. Because Moses is warning us, there'll become times where you think, Amalek is done. There's no anti-Semitism, we all get along. And there's this idea conveyed in the Torah that the nation of Amalek, as long as there's a Jewish people, there will be a force and there will be people trying to destroy them.
Now, there's a whole lot of different things that we can be focusing on in this week's parasha. What do you think is the main lesson or message that we can take away?
It's not this, as I said, this parasha. How many did you guys? 75 mitzvahs, 74?
Yeah, 74.
Right. So I wouldn't say there's a central message. What I would say is the following. So we saw Amalek, we saw Ma'akeh, right? The theme that I would say to emerge from the parasha is that the Torah speaks to the Jewish people. It gives us a guidance in life. You asked me before, tell me some mitzvot that are relevant. All the mitzvot are relevant because the Torah speaks about ritual. There are laws, fascinating laws about giving to the poor. Many laws about giving to the poor. There's laws in this parasha about honesty in business, about not cheating in your weights when you're measuring in business. And then there's ritual laws as well, being husband and wife. If I would say the theme throughout all these laws are that God has given us sort of a guide and gives us mitzvot that are relevant to all areas of our life, of our personal life and our national life. And these many mitzvot, they speak to each of us, but they also speak to all of us in different ways.
Well, thank you so much for coming in. This was certainly an enlightening speech that you gave us about this week's parasha.
My pleasure.
We've become pretty accustomed to hearing about elderly Jewish folks who are only now celebrating their bar or bat mitzvahs because they were unable to hold them in their teenage years. That was often caused by the traumatic events of World War II and the Holocaust. But now we bring you the unprecedented story of Israel Crystal, who is the world's oldest man and preparing to celebrate his own Jewish rite of passage exactly 100 years late, this time because of the First World War. The bar-mitzvah boy is an 113-year-old Holocaust survivor who now lives in Israel. He was born in Poland in 1903, and his family wasn't able to hold a ceremony for him at the traditional age of 13 because his mother died when he was 10 and his father was away serving in the Russian army during the war. 7 years later, Crystal was operating his family's candy business in Lodz. By the time the Nazis invaded Poland in 1939, he was married and had 2 children. They were forced into the Lodz ghetto, where his children died. The couple was deported to the notorious Auschwitz concentration camp in 1944, where his wife was killed. After managing to survive the Holocaust, Crystal remarried and moved to Haifa, just 2 years after the modern state of Israel was founded. He again made his living as a candy maker and lived his long life surrounded by a growing family. You may remember that he was recognized as the world's oldest man last March, when he was only 112. At the time, Crystal commented that he really didn't have a secret for longevity, but believes that everything is determined from above, and that no one will ever really know the reasons why. He added there were smarter, stronger, and better-looking men than he who are no longer alive, but that all that is left for us to do is to keep on working as hard as we can and rebuild what is lost. And that he certainly did. His daughter says that he will be surrounded by around 100 family members, including many grandchildren and great-grandchildren, when he at long last celebrates his belated bar mitzvah in a few weeks' time. She says they will bless him, dance with him, and just be happy, and because he was born 113 years ago today, on the 15th of September, everyone at ILTV joins me in wishing Israel Crystal a very happy birthday and many returns. In fact, here in Israel there's an expression ad 120, meaning until the age of 120. So we hope to be wishing him happy birthday for many years to come. Many sports enthusiasts around the world have been following the 2016 Paralympics in Rio, which kicked off on September 7th and will conclude on the 18th. There's been a lot of coverage of the 2 Israeli athletes who were awarded 2 bronze medals so far in rowing and shooting events. But it may come as a surprise to most people to find out that the founder of the Paralympics was a Jewish doctor who escaped the Holocaust by fleeing Nazi Germany. Dr. Ludwig Guttmann was born in 1899 in Upper Silesia. He chose a medical career, and by the 1933 rise of the Third Reich, he was recognized as a top neurosurgeon in Germany. After the Nazis restricted him to working at the Jewish hospital in Breslau, he did his utmost to not only heal victims of Nazi persecution, but to also save them from deportation to death camps. The doctor and his family managed to escape to England in 1933, where they became members of the Oxford Jewish community. At the request of the British government in 1943, Dr. Guttmann established and headed the UK's first centre for spinal injuries. It was there that he stressed the critical role sports could play in the therapy of injured military personnel, by helping them to not only regain physical strength, but their self-respect and dignity. He then went on to organize the first competition for all disabled people in 1948, that eventually became known as the Paralympics. By 1952, more than 130 international competitors participated in Guttmann's initiative. And 8 years later, his vision of the Games gaining equal par with the actual Olympic Games came true, when both events were held simultaneously in Rome. Dr. Guttmann passed away in 1980, leaving behind an astonishing legacy that continues to flourish today. Right now in Brazil, there are 4,300 athletes participating in the 2016 Paralympics from 161 nations around the world. And now for our Hebrew word of the day. You should always try to focus on the solution and not the problem. So today's word is pitaron, which means solution in Hebrew. Every problem has its pitaron. The only problem is where to find it. Just try not to find a temporary pitaron for your issue, because it may end up becoming a permanent issue. Now, don't be discouraged if it's taking you too long to find the right pitaron. It doesn't mean there isn't one. They say half the solution to any problem lies in simply defining it. The most important thing, though, is to try to look at your situation in a brighter light, because in a way, a problem is really just an opportunity for a pitagon. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at the weather forecast. The weekend is finally here. Friday is expected to be partly cloudy with a high of 85 degrees. The weather should stay the same through Saturday, but the temperature should go up to 86. All right, everybody, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.78 shekels to the American dollar. Remember to sign up for our daily newsletter at iltv.tv, and don't forget to check out our next update at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Thanks for watching, and see you tonight.